Berberine has a profound longevity. Well, not profound. It's interesting. It's profound in the sense that it's interesting. It's not very powerful, but it has a weak effect that is interesting. Hello friends, welcome to another segment in my series on the cholinergic system. This segment is going to discuss herbal reversible acetylcholinesterase inhibitors, which means herbal supplements that can be used to decrease the activity of the enzyme acetylcholinesterase, thereby increasing the level of acetylcholine that we have in our brains and nervous systems. So before I do discuss the herbal options, not all of them, but the strongest ones, I'd like to mention something mysterious that I've noticed about acetylcholinesterase inhibitors. There are some studies that show that acetylcholinesterase inhibitors can reduce the dopamine-dependent addictive behavior of animals. In particular, rats who are addicted to morphine and cocaine show less addiction behavior and less preference for their substances. And monkeys who are addicted to amphetamines show the same behavior. Studies in humans have shown mixed results so far. Now, the reason this concerns me as opposed to excites me is because the only way that this could be happening that I know of is by somehow limiting the function of dopaminergic neurons or dopamine receptors in the brain. And this is not something that we really want to do in someone who is not in a pathologically addicted state. Dopamine is critical to drive, to mental drive. And mental drive and ambition is critical to work. So we don't really want to be playing with the dopamine system without realizing it. Nonetheless, with that disclaimer said, I'd like to take you on a short tour of the most interesting herbs that can be used for acetylcholinesterase inhibition. Now, the first thing that we'll say is that you have probably, well, not probably, but you may have used an acetylcholinesterase inhibitor in the past and not realized it. So for example, aside from one herbal supplement that is very common that we're going to mention in a little bit, salvia is an acetylcholinesterase inhibitor. Not only that, but it directly agonizes, which means stimulates, the nicotinic cholinergic receptors. Marijuana is an acetylcholinesterase inhibitor as well, specifically THC, the psychoactive compound of marijuana, is an acetylcholinesterase inhibitor as well. So you may have come across them before. Now I'll give you the list of of the most powerful acetylcholinesterase inhibitors that are herbs and my favorite ones to discuss. The first one comes from a plant called the Huperzine serrata plant. The compound is called Huperzine A, and it is commonly available as a nutritional supplement. Now this compound has a dual action. Not only does it block the activity of the acetylcholinesterase enzyme reversibly, but it also antagonizes NMDA receptors, which are receptors that respond to the neurotransmitter, the excitatory neurotransmitter glutamate. So it antagonizes these receptors, which means it blocks their activity and blocks their response to glutamate to some degree. Now, why is that interesting? The reason is because excitotoxicity, as I mentioned in an earlier part, is one of the primary ways that neurons die through our lifetimes. Neurons don't like to be overstimulated. So when their receptors have been agonized consistently too much, the receptors try to downregulate. And if this doesn't happen, the neurons may die. Now, one of the main ways that neurons die is from the excitatory neurotransmitter glutamate, which binds to the NMDA receptor. NMDA receptor, sorry. I always get this one confused. But they bind to the NMDA receptor. And when glutamine binds to it, sometimes it overbinds to it, it can cause excitotoxic related neuronal death. So there's some advantage to using something that may partially block these receptors. Additionally, it is important to note that Huperzine A is less toxic than donepezil, which is the main Alzheimer's disease medication being prescribed in the US. And that's the end of the interest with Huperzine A. Now, there are 4 more herbal supplements that I'd like to mention to you. The first one is Ginkgo Biloba. Now, Ginkgo Biloba, I'm not sure that, actually, let me be specific. We have never seen any literature that has compared the affinity of Huperzine A to Ginkgo Biloba as an acetylcholinesterase inhibitor. We don't know which one is stronger. We do know about the other herbal supplements that I'll mention now, but we don't know whether Huperzine is stronger than Ginkgo or not. Ginkgo is the strongest of the remaining list though. Ginkgo Biloba has been featured in Eastern medicine for ages, and it was originally thought to be some kind of nootropic, but people didn't really know why. Well, it turns out it reversibly inhibits the acetylcholinesterase enzyme, leading to more acetylcholine in the brain. It does so quite strongly, and it has a side benefit, which is it has phytochemicals in it that create an antioxidant effect in the body. So Ginkgo will not only increase the acetylcholine in your brain, but will have a quite strong antioxidant effect in the body. Now, a second compound to consider is from the plant Bacopa monnieri. Bacopa is a commonly used nootropic. You will find it, and by the way, I wouldn't really call these things nootropics. Technically, a nootropic is something that does not stimulate and does not depress, only improves brain function. However, it is not possible that increasing the acetylcholine in the brain will not stimulate a person overall. It will cause some stimulation, and including improved athletic performance. So you can't really classically think of these things as nootropics, but nonetheless, if you go to the subreddit nootropics on Reddit, you'll find Bacopa everywhere, people using Bacopa all the time, and the main reason they're using it is to block the acetylcholinesterase enzyme. Now, Bacopa also has a side benefit, or side cost, depending on how you look at it. It is anxiolytic, which means it decreases anxiety in people in an acute way, not in a chronic way. Most things that are anxiolytic, most pharmacologically anxiolytic substances only cause anxiolytic activities in the short term, in an acute dosage. Over several months, the anxiolytic effect tends to disappear. And the reason for this is because of receptor downregulation at the receptors involved. Now, in the case of Bacopa, we do not know how it exerts its anxiolytic effect. However, I hypothesize that it has some kind of effect on serotonergic receptors, and therefore I would caution its use in a chronic fashion. If you were to use Bacopa as a reversible acetylcholinesterase inhibitor, I would use it in sparing fashion when you specifically desire an anxiolytic effect, because you do not want those serotonergic receptors to downregulate. That will cause an overall loss in your cognitive function. Not classic cognitive function, but cognitive well-being, let's say. Now, there are 2 more herbs that I'd like to talk to you about. They are berberine and palmistine. Now, these are very well-known herbs. What's interesting about these 2, they're weaker than Ginkgo Biloba, but synergistically they have a significant effect on acetylcholinesterase, increasing acetylcholine in the brain. But what's interesting about them is, while Ginkgo has an antioxidant effect and Bacopa has an anxiolytic effect, berberine has a profound longevity. Well, not profound. It's interesting. It's profound in the sense that it's interesting. It's not very powerful, but it has a weak effect that is interesting on the AMP kinase pathway, which is the main target of metformin, and also one of, maybe you could say, 4 main targets for longevity researchers. It's one of the most promising things that it can increase human lifespan. AMP kinase it senses nutrient deprivation in the body. When you are deprived of nutrition, AMP kinase is usually turned on, and it does survival mechanisms in the body that we actually want to happen if we intend to live to a very long age or not age as quickly. So berberine activates this useful pathway in a weak way, not as well as metformin, but it also uniquely blocks the PCSK9 protein, which is very interesting because PCSK9 is also the target of a class of drugs called PCSK9 inhibitors that are extremely expensive. The most common one will cost you about $5,000 a year, and they're seen within the cardiovascular community as the cardiovascular drug of the future, because they may have less side effects than statins, but may be as effective at hopefully reducing cardiovascular risk or risk for cardiovascular events. PCSK9 inhibitors are not covered by any insurance unless you have clinically diagnosed hypercholesterolemia, which means you have extremely high cholesterol levels, usually judged to be over 300 total cholesterol. If you do have that, you can go get it prescribed and your insurance will cover it. If not, you have to pay about $5,000 a year. So, berberine is unique in that it actually blocks the PCSK9 as well, although of course more weak than these medications do. So berberine is quite attractive in that sense. Palmitine is also attractive because palmitine has been shown in vitro, not in vivo, which means in a petri dish, to be toxic to prostate cancer cells. So palmitine can be considered to have some kind of chemoprotective effect, whereas berberine can be considered to have an anti-diabetic effect as well as a cardioprotective effect. So in combination, one could speculate that berberine and palmitine would be a great combination for the purposes of enhancing longevity while increasing acetylcholine levels in the brain. And really, if they're combined with ginkgo, which has a strong antioxidant effect, you may have a really healthy alternative to the pharmaceutical versions that we described in the last video. So again, to repeat, you may have encountered acetylcholinesterase inhibitors before in your life. You probably have used ginkgo. If you are a very experimental person, you may have used salvia or marijuana. Now, the herbal recommendations or herbal options that I think are considerable, Huperzine A and ginkgo and bacopa and berberine and palmitine all have different effects that are quite interesting. Huperzine may be neuroprotective by protecting the brain from excitotoxicity that derives from the NMDA receptors, whereas ginkgo has antioxidant effects. Bacopa has an anxiolytic effect that I don't know how desirable it really is, but in the short term you could use it. And then berberine and palmitine have what one could speculate to be longevity promoting effects. Thank you so much for watching the video, and stay tuned to the next segment on the cholinergic system. Have a fruitful day.